Dave, who do you think's a bigger threat to the world? Murderous members of the Taliban taking over Afghanistan or Donald Trump? What do you think?
I mean,
A or B?
I think it probably depends on who you ask at this point in time, which is terrifying. But I think the obvious answer, Donald Trump's a lot less scary than the members of the Taliban.
Actually murdering people,
Right.
and torturing and cutting heads off and all that kind of stuff. Unless
And subscribing to Sharia law, which basically says certain people have rights and others don't, and that's just the way it is.
that's absolutely correct. There is no concept of universal individual natural rights under Sharia law.
Right.
There are the believers who have certain privileges under Sharia law, and there are non-believers who are effectively non-entities.
And then there are women.
That's right.
I mean, right? Like,
that's right.
There can be a lot of women who are believers.
That's right.
Those women still get raped, killed,
that's right.
tortured, whatever
That's right.
else.
So one would think that the members of the Taliban are a bigger threat than Donald Trump, unless you work at Twitter.
That's right.
And Twitter says, well, we cannot allow Donald Trump to be on Twitter. He's a huge threat. But the Taliban, hey, man, let's offer them a platform and help them so they can organize their activities.
This is true. Like, can we really believe that this is the world we live in today? We live in a world where Jack Dorsey and his minions at Twitter are sitting there saying, sure, you Taliban mullah, you Sharia law advocate, you rapist, murdering torturer, you are welcome on our platform. But Donald Trump says mean things to people, and we can't have that on.
Can't have that. You know, I have a little bit of a working hypothesis, kind of a theory, but it's not real well thought out. I'll throw it out there anyway. People can make fun of me if they want to. And I think it really stems from the false progressive view of human nature.
Sure.
The whole progressive project, progressivism, going back 150 years, started with a mistaken view of what human nature is. And so I think to this day, progressives have a really hard time understanding what human nature is. They have this kind of fictionalized fantasy view of human nature. So I believe for many progressives, to be a person who engages in injustice, terrible moral wrongs, murder, rape, ugly theft, ugly things, hurting other people, they must be physically ugly, and they must sound ugly, and they almost like this, like some sort of image that you would see in a movie or something like this.
Right.
And then people who look nice, people who sound nice, well, they must be nice. They must be nice people. Not understanding what human nature really is, that within any human being is the capacity for both.
Right.
Human beings can be really polite and friendly and agreeable and gregarious and sociable sometimes. And those very same people can go do terrible, horrific. They can engage in the most heinous kinds of injustices.
You know, it's interesting. It goes back to one of our previous case studies, and that was intent versus results.
Yeah.
Right? If you say my intent is for everybody to be happy and I just want a peaceful world and I just want everything.
I want to save the planet. I want to protect the children. I want to help women. I love LGBTQ, right? All those things. You must be a really good person.
I mean, imagine if all these Sharia law murderous Taliban members were sitting there saying, we're killing all these people, but you know what that's going to do? It's going to lead to depopulation, which is going to help us in the fight against climate change.
Absolutely.
Well, then, man, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we should have more Sharia law around the world.
I guarantee you there are pockets of environmentalists right now who are not troubled by what the Taliban is doing in Afghanistan. They probably hope that they do more of it.
Well,
because the fewer people there are, the better it is for Mother Earth.
And those are also the same people who just think anything that the United States does is imperialist, is bad, is wrong. Little tangent of that. I saw another video earlier this week. There was a protest in Jamaica, at the U.S. consulate in Jamaica.
Okay.
Right? And these people are saying the United States is acting like an imperialist power trying to tell us how to live our lives by flying a LGBTQ flag at the
Embassy?
at the embassy in Jamaica. So how do you make sense of that? Do you hate America for being an imperialist power?
Right.
Do you support the Jamaicans for saying no, in our culture, being gay is not acceptable?
Right.
And I'm not saying this is all Jamaicans.
Sure.
I know plenty of Jamaicans who would say, no, that's
Sure.
okay. People have their right to love whoever they want to love, but there is a group of people in Jamaica. Believe it or not, it's not just the United States where there are people who don't believe in that gays are equal or whatever else.
Probably 25 years ago, I was at an academic conference. It was the annual meeting of the American Political Science Association, which is as terrible as it sounds.
Yes, I can only imagine.
It's like 5,000 or 6,000 geeky political scientists getting together and talking about the most ridiculous, obscure, unimportant things.
Okay.
But there was one moment that has forever been just fixed in my mind. I was on a panel and two audience members, they were both academics, both political scientists. One was a feminist and one was a multiculturalist. And they were debating Islam and Sharia. And the feminist was saying, it's terrible. Muslims living under Sharia law treat women terribly. They oppress women. They control them. They won't let them live freely. They sometimes torture and rape them and murder them. And she was making deep moral judgments about Islam and Sharia law. And the multiculturalists came back and said, hey, man, that's just their culture. You can't judge someone else's culture. Who's to say what's right and what's wrong? And it was this eye-opening, firsthand experience of the sheer nihilism of modern progressive academia, right? There is no solid moral foundation to have any of these kinds of discussions. And before we move on to other subjects, we were talking about this kind of fantasy view of, it's a caricature is what it is, that evil people must look and sound very repulsive, and people who sound and look nice and who say nice things say, I'm just here to help you and help your children and help the world, and I see here's my rainbow flag I'm flying. I can't have any nefarious motives or interests.
Right.
We saw this on display. There's a reporter at CNN,
right,
and she used to dress as she's in Afghanistan,
right,
and she used to dress in sort of typical professional what a professional Western woman would wear. And is that accurate?
Yes, but with respect to the culture there, right?
Okay.
And I preface it by saying, in a lot of those countries, there is an expectation you keep your shoulders covered. Arms covered down to your elbows. You keep something covered down to your knees. Like you're not women in a lot of Middle Eastern countries don't necessarily dress in yoga pants and dress the way that women in America do.
All kinds of jokes are coming to my mind already. But the point is, this is a Western woman. She's either American or British. She's a Westerner, white,
right,
and she would wear typical professional clothes, and when she would do her reporting now, within the last 72 hours, she shows up on CNN, and she's got the
hijab,
the hijab on. Right, she's all covered up. She looks like a Muslim woman.
Yep.
You can barely even tell who she is. And there's a clip of her where she seems just utterly confused, totally flummoxed that these members of the Taliban, on the one hand, they're murderers, they're chanting death to America. And at the same time, they seem nice.
Right.
They're smiling at her, and this just makes no. How can this be? How can someone who smiles and waves also engage in murder and rape? And so I wanted our viewers and our listeners just to take a quick look at this.
I think we have to show it. I think there's no way that you can truly appreciate what this experience and how crazy. And I bet a lot of our people have already seen it. But for the first time, let's try to insert this into.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a progressive journalist reporting for CNN who cannot understand how murderous members of the Taliban can also seem friendly and nice.
They're just chanting death to America, but they seem friendly at the same time. It's utterly bizarre.
Tom, we just see this video. Now, here's the big question. You posed a question to me at the beginning.
Yeah.
Who was more dangerous, the murderous Taliban or Donald Trump, right? When was the last time Twitter allowed an interview of Donald Trump on Twitter?
Good point.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even that Donald Trump can't post on Twitter.
Yeah.
If you are a news outlet,
Yeah.
you are not allowed to post an interview. If a member of the Fox News or Newsmax or
Right.
or OAN or any other community, if somebody at the Federalist or heck, even if it was a congressman, even if it was
Right.
Ted Cruz
Right.
saying, hey, I want to go sit down with Donald Trump and I want to pull out my iPhone, I want to record this, and I want to talk to him about something, anything.
He couldn't post it on Twitter.
It could have been about the Field of Dreams game
Yeah.
in baseball last week,
Well,
right?
or more importantly, it could be about some policy or government, right, program or something that Trump was involved in as president. It
Right.
could be official government business.
Right. But my point was, it doesn't matter what Donald Trump's talking about.
Right.
He cannot be on Twitter.
Right.
They will not allow a conversation with him. They won't allow his face
And
to be on there.
Let's be real clear here, because some people watching this are going to think, "Oh, you guys are just you're drunk on Trump. You just think Trump's the greatest thing in the world." No. We've never said that. Neither of us think Trump is the greatest thing in the world. The man has all kinds of faults. We're just looking at Twitter's own standards
Right.
and how they apply them. They say this guy, Donald Trump, is so terrible, is such a threat, is such a problem. We can't allow any mention of him, any posting by him, anything, any presence on our platform. Meanwhile, guys driving around with Chinese-made AK-47s that they're trying to cool off the barrels because they were just slaughtering people get to appear on Twitter.
Right.
That's okay. In fact, they're using Twitter. The Taliban in Afghanistan is using Twitter to organize, to communicate with each other. It's one of the ways they've been able to steamroll through the country so fast.
Internationally. And this goes all the way back to 2014,
Yeah.
right? If you remember, do you remember the story about the Taliban 5 in exchange for Bo Bergdahl?
I do.
Right.
Yeah.
So President Obama at the time
Yep.
is trying to get everybody out of Gitmo, out of Guantanamo Bay. He wants to close down the facility, and he's looking for every excuse to either move or release as many prisoners as possible.
I'm going to interrupt you and just add, he never did achieve that. He never did close it. And one of the he campaigned on that. When Obama was elected the very first time, I'm getting old. I'm mixing up all the years.
2008.
Eight, right, when he very first was elected? That campaign leading up to his election, that was one of his main things.
Yeah.
He was going to close down Guantanamo Bay, close down that prison. And as soon as he was sworn in, as soon as he had access to the top secret information on who was there, and he opened those files and he realized, man, these are some bad guys. And Guantanamo, there's all kinds of problems and questions surrounding it, but it's also clear there's no easy answer of what to do with these people, because these people have done really terrible, awful, violent things. If you let them out, they're going to go do more terrible, awful, violent things, including terrible, awful, violent things against Americans.
We actually have members of the Vino Veritas Society who served at Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
Who can tell you all kinds of stories. I mean, it was bad. But in 2014, we have this deserter, Bo Bergdahl, who went and actually, I believe, fought with the Taliban.
I think that's right. I think he did.
And I don't know that it was ever proven clearly exactly what he did, exactly what role he took on,
And
how much information he shared, all of that.
He wasn't merely an American citizen, if I remember. He wasn't merely a U.S. citizen. He was in the military.
He was in the military.
And he deserts.
Went
leaves.
AWOL,
Yes,
deserts.
Yes.
goes and joins up with the Taliban, and then realizes this isn't as good. Grass isn't always greener.
Contrary to our friendly progressive journalists at CNN, these Taliban members aren't as friendly and fuzzy and warm as they
might
seem to be.
smile and be friendly, but when they chant death to America, they mean it.
Right. Or when they start peeling your fingernails off or cutting your head off, it becomes a different thing.
So in exchange for Bo Bergdahl, President Obama doesn't just trade 1 for 1. He trades 5 members of the Taliban, releases them from Guantanamo Bay to get Bo Bergdahl back.
Yeah.
One of them, I'm not exactly sure how to say his name. I believe it's Kerkwa.
Okay.
Kerkwa, releases him to Qatar. He spent the next several years in Qatar communicating with the ground forces in Afghanistan, communicating with ground forces in Iran, and now he is back in Afghanistan as one of the military leaders. In fact, they've given him the title of Mullah.
It's amazing.
So
it's amazing. This guy we had captured was in Guantanamo.
Right.
Obama releases him in exchange for this deserter, and he's part of that crew running the streets of Kabul.
And he's still on Twitter.
He's still on Twitter.
He is allowed to use Twitter, but Donald Trump isn't.
Yeah.
We made the point. The whole thing, I think it was one of those things that we have to acknowledge sort of the absurdity of some of the social media decisions and some of these decisions that are happening. And it's just one of those conversations. We as guardians of the American idea, we need to have some of those conversations with our friends and family. I mean, it is somewhat absurd to me that anybody, and I'm sure there are people in my own family who would sit there and say, yep, that's right. Donald Trump should not be on Twitter. Donald Trump should not be on Facebook. But those guys, it's going to save that region. That region's going to be better off because they can communicate. And some people you're just never going to convince. But I think anybody who's willing to be thoughtful, I think anybody who's willing to actually have a conversation, they're going to see how absurd this is, and maybe this is an opportunity to have a real conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what I'm asking for is just a little consistency, just a little bit. I'm not asking for Twitter to invite Donald Trump back on tomorrow. I'm saying if you're going to start banning people that you see as threats, well, then start with the murdering thugs who are imposing Sharia law and have millions of people scrambling for hiding in their basements, in their cellars, wherever they just want to stay out of sight of these thugs walking down the street with machine guns, ready to shoot anyone who's not in compliance with Sharia law. Right. Start by banning them.
And if you really want to believe in and advocate for women's rights, for LGBTQ rights, man, you can't look at those people and say these are good people.
You know, Dave, that reminds me, if Afghanistan's not close to Israel, but around 2,000 miles away, same general big region of the world.
It's closer to Israel than California is to New York.
Excellent point.
For people who want that.
Yes, great point. Yes, and I bring up Israel, even though Israel's not directly involved in what's going on in Afghanistan, just as a point of contrast, talking about the hypocrisy, the confusion, the lack of any kind of consistency. Progressive Americans routinely denounce Israel as all kinds of terrible things. They say it's an apartheid state, it's a tyranny, it's on and on and on. And I want people to think about, I mean, right there within Israel, you have the Gaza Strip, and you have a bunch of Arab Muslims who engage in all kinds of terrible atrocities. There have been 2 independent sovereign regimes in the news. Just recently, we have Afghanistan in the news right now. The Taliban has taken over. People are literally, they're not just fleeing tyranny, they are in a panic. They're desperate. These horrific images that are now circulated around the world, they're holding on to military transport planes, these jets, and they were engaged in suicide is what it was. They knew they weren't going to be able to hang on.
You can't hold on to 30,000 feet
Right.
to an airplane.
And yet they were so terrified. They wanted any way to get out of that country. They were willing to try. That's happening in Afghanistan. Just a few weeks ago, we saw all the uprising and riots in Cuba, where there have been decades of repression, oppression, persecution of anyone who is critical of the government, complete crushing of free speech, routine violation of property rights, which are basically unknown in Cuba other than the government. Mm-hmm. And so I would love to ask progressives at, say, the 1619 Project, right? Who've won Pulitzer Prizes.
Yep.
By making arguments that the United States is this terrible, horrible place, or progressives in university departments of sociology and anthropology and political science and English literature and women's studies and Latino studies, or progressives in newsrooms at CNN and NBC, get those progressives together and say, which is worse, Israel or the people in the Gaza Strip, or the Taliban in Afghanistan, or the communists in Cuba? Which is worse? Which is worse, the United States or those people in Gaza or Afghanistan or Cuba? I have a hunch a whole lot of progressives would say Israel or the United States.
Sure.
They seem
Without a doubt.
They seem to hate Israel and the United States. They don't seem to express any sort of hatred for the communists in Cuba or the thugs on the Gaza Strip or the murderous religious fanatics in Afghanistan. And that's really what they are. They're fanatics, murdering and torturing. They don't seem to hate them. But many progressives seem to despise and loathe the United States and Israel.
You were just talking about that, and it was reminded me of a story. I'll try to make this quick, but I think it's really telling to the point you're making. I have a friend, one of my oldest friends. We go all the way back to high school together. Black kid. Grew up in Chicago and Oklahoma before moving to Colorado in high school, and we knew each other all the way since. So we're now going on 30 years of friendship. And we were sitting at a local cafe. This was about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And he was black. And so it for some reason gave this progressive barista at the cafe this green light in her own head. Now, her hair was green, so maybe that added to it. But gave her this green light to think that, well, then he must agree with me because he's black, right? And I must be able to say anything I want.
Right.
And she walks over to us and she says, "Come here." And we lean in to listen, and she says, "I got to tell you something. I hate white people." And now, my friend is very conservative.
Right.
I mean, he is about as conservative as they come. And we both look at her like, and I said,
Oh, wait,
why?
you guys don't know her. You're
Well,
just
it was
customers.
It was
in
a
the
cafe that I've spent a lot of time at. She'd gotten to know my name because I'd eaten there a lot and used to sit and like to do work from there. And for those who've known me for a while, you know exactly the place I'm talking about. Yeah. And she comes over and she says, "I hate white people."
Does that mean she hates you?
Well, I don't know. So I said, "Why?" And she says, "Because white people have always owned slaves. And white people enslave people." And I'm sitting there thinking, she's watched a lot of movies clearly, but does she know the Egyptians weren't white?
Right.
Does she know that the Romans weren't white?
I have a hunch the answer to most of your questions you're going to ask is no.
Does she know that Sharia law is slavery? Mm-hmm. Does she know that these happy, smiling faces on CNN who are going to go imprison a bunch of women and rape and murder them and behead people for being gay in Afghanistan today, does she know they're not white? There's this perception that, oh, you're a white American, you must be bad.
I'll add to that a really sharp cutting edge. The origins of slavery reach back to the parts of the world where there's the oldest evidence of the first human tribes in Africa.
Right.
In Africa, slavery originates in Africa. That is the gift Africa gives to the rest of the world, the institution of slavery. And couple that with the fact that at various points in history, all kinds of people have engaged in slavery of different forms. All different colors of people have enslaved.
Right.
Sometimes they enslave people of the same color, and sometimes they enslave people of other color. But there was one group of people who led the fight to end slavery, and they tended to be white.
Right.
It's a pretty amazing thing.
We talk about all this, and I think that's the point. I think the proof there is most of those people at CNN and NBC, MSNBC, and NBC, the New York Times newsrooms, the Washington Post newsrooms, they are going to say, no, it's America.
I'm reminded of a book I haven't looked at in a long time, and I'm probably going to botch the title. The author is named Keith Richburg.
Okay.
I think it was something like Out of America, Not Out of America, something like this. Keith Richburg is a journalist. He might still be with the Washington Post. I haven't followed up on it. This book came out probably 18 years ago. And when he was and he has dark black skin, born in the United States, dark black skin. According to himself, he always prided himself as, he would call himself an African American, and he would emphasize the African part. And then he graduates from college, gets a job with the Washington Post, and he becomes the Africa correspondent for the Washington Post. And he's there in the 90s when the genocides going on in Rwanda, the fighting, the tribal fighting, the slaughter between the Hutus and the Tutsis. And he opened, the opening page, you open the book, the very first page is this graphic description. He's standing next to a river in Africa. And there are so many thousands of corpses and body parts coming down. They're getting clogged up on rocks, and they're forming a dam, and the river is overflowing because of all these corpses and the stench and the bugs and everything that goes with that. And then later in the book, he describes driving down little dirt roads, out in the middle of nowhere, and how common it was to see a human arm next to the road, or a head. You're driving down the road. There's no body attached to it. You don't know who it is or how it came to be there. There's a human head. And after being there a few years, he writes this book and he says, I realized I'm not African. I'm American.
Right.
The things that I see appall me, and yet I'm here. I'm spending years with Africans. They sort of take it for granted. They're not surprised, but they're not appalled by it. That these things just happen. He said, I have this American sense that human life is precious, is important. Even the people you don't like, you don't want to see them getting their heads torn off or their limbs torn off, or you don't want to drive down a road and see body parts out there. That's grotesque and it's unjust and it's terrible. And it was such a revealing book to see this American, this U.S. citizen, who grows up he went to private schools, and I don't know if he went to Columbia. He went to some elite progressive university, right? And there he is, Mr. Progressive American, black skin, calls himself African, and then he spends some years in Africa, and he watches Africans slaughtering each other.
Yeah.
He's like, that's not how I look at the world at all.
Right. There's this thought I keep having, and I've been having this for the last couple of days as I've been watching what's going on in Afghanistan, that really speaks to that. Because you sit there and you wonder, do the majority of citizens there understand the foundation of traditional Western values, not current progressive Western values, but the classical Western values? And I ask that because you still see these.
Do you mean like the ideas of the American founding?
The ideas of the American founding,
sure.
Right? The things that we as the Vino Veritas Society want to guard against. Yeah. And I ask that because I think about things like some of the polls, and I don't know how you can accurately do polling in Afghanistan.
Right.
But I've heard polls that upwards of 90+% of Afghani citizens still support Sharia law. They actually support the Taliban takeover of the country. Now, are they allowing women to vote in polls? Are they allowing women to give an opinion in polls? Are they allowing gays to give opinions in polls? Or is this just the Afghani men who are going to benefit from something like that?
And at the same time, how many of the respondents in these polls are terrified to speak their real minds because they don't know. Some pollster standing there asking questions. They don't know who's going to learn about their answers.
You're right, but I do get the sense, and there are other countries, and you brought up Israel earlier, and bring this up because of that. There has long been this battle. I don't know how much our listeners have spent time learning about the country of Jordan.
Right.
Jordan's a really interesting case because Jordan is this Muslim country that has a lot of residents. A lot of their citizens hate Jews, believe in Sharia law, want Israel to disappear from the face of the planet.
Right.
Yet the Jordanian monarchy is pro-Israel. The Jordanian monarchy is sitting there saying, no, we want to be a part of the Western world. I always get who's the father and son mixed up. There was King Hussein, I think, was the father, and King Abdullah is the son, but I might be mixing those up. But the father made peace with Israel against the wishes of their people. And I wonder, and I sit there and I've always thought, I wonder how many of those people understand what life could be like if they embraced private property rights. I mean, you actually have a monarch there who would be willing to acknowledge private property rights for his citizens, who wants to turn Jordan into a Western culture, and the people don't want it.
Well, it reminds me of this parallel. I mean, so we've acknowledged when you talk about something like public opinion polls in Afghanistan, all kinds of potential problems. Who knows how accurate they are? But if it is accurate, and it might be, it really wouldn't surprise me. It reminds me of something similar. I mean, we saw this right here in the United States. For 4 years, while Donald Trump was president, what was the reaction of progressives? They screamed and yelled and called him names and said, this is terrible every day. This is terrible. This is intolerable. We have to get rid of him. Have to get someone else. But never once, as far as I know, I haven't read or heard one progressive stand up and say, ooh, maybe we shouldn't have a government that's so powerful because look what happens when a Donald Trump gets in there, right? He could do bad stuff to us. Let's scale back the power of government so that whomever gets elected at any time, it won't be such a thing. What they said is, let's have this big totalitarian government with virtually unlimited power. Let's just make sure and have one of our guys in it. Someone we like and vote for. I think there's a lot of Afghanis who have a similar opinion. Sharia law is okay as long as the mullahs or the imams or the local priests and enforcers are people we know and we like.
Well, and I think that speaks to the larger issue of this entire Afghanistan situation. We talked about Afghanistan. We talked about I talked about Jordan.
Yeah,
you have it with the Arabs in the Gaza Strip as well, right? Yep. I would strongly argue that the majority of Arabs living in the Gaza Strip would actually support Hamas leadership. This isn't a group of people who want to go in and say, oh, we just want our land and our freedom, but we would rather the terrorists aren't our leaders, right? They want the terrorists at the helm. They want the terrorists who are going to put Sharia law in power and do whatever they do. And I say that because that creates a serious problem when America or other countries try to go in and get involved in these foreign conflicts. Right? Why did Afghanistan, in a matter of hours, get taken back by the Taliban within hours of us leaving?
Yeah.
Pretty simple. People keep asking and saying, well, why didn't the Afghanis learn to fight while we were gone? Why didn't they do anything? Well,
they didn't have to.
There were two reasons. One, they didn't have to, right? They were being taken care of by our defense forces. We were sitting there and we were taking care of them. It sounds a little bit like welfare here, right?
Well, I was just going to say, this might sound like a truism, And by golly, it's true. Dependency does not breed independence.
Right. Right. So just like when you're on welfare here, it is
Yeah.
very rare for you to be on welfare and use that as an opportunity to lift yourself up,
Yep.
to find opportunities. Most people on welfare here learn to game the system.
Yep.
They invest their time and energy.
And then teach their children how to do the same thing.
Right. So you have that, and that's been proven. And
Yes.
there's going to be people who say, "Oh my God, I can't believe Dave just said that. That's so horrible," but it's really true, and there's been plenty of evidence of it. It's the same thing over in Afghanistan. You had the people who were dependent. They didn't look at it as they just assumed, okay, the Americans are always going to be here, and they had good reason, because really since World War II, we have just stayed in every time we've gotten involved in a conflict. Look at Germany; we still have bases and we still have troops in Germany. I mean,
Well, what you're pointing to is the phenomenon of endless wars
Right.
that never end. And there's the international meaning of that in war in the traditional sense. They start as military wars, but we also see that domestically. It's become this is part of the progressive transformation of America. Is we call domestic public policies and programs wars, right? So we have a war on poverty, a war on drugs. Various politicians have talked about things like a war on racism and a war on homophobia and things like this. And the modern progressive American regime, the government that we have, and the way it is created, really has an incentive of continuing these wars, both the domestic wars as well as international wars, for a number of reasons. First of all, you have the big bureaucratic class in terms of foreign wars, the entire intelligence community. You have the whole Department of Defense, this gigantic, sprawling, huge bureaucracy where, people will be employed there for 30, 40 years before retiring. You have the CIA. You have these big bureaucracies. And as long as we're at war, they're important.
right.
They can demand from Congress more resources, pay increases, right? Because we're at war. Same thing is true domestically. As long as the war on poverty continues, then the bureaucrats at
Urban development?
urban
HUD?
development. Well, HUD's part of Health and Human Services. Is that
Right.
what they call it? I get there's so many
so.
of them. I get them mixed up. The
It's
point
some
is,
acronym.
it makes them more important, right? As long as the war on poverty continues, they're more important. So you have this bureaucratic class who are incentivized by not ending these wars. And then you have a political class, and I mean people who get elected to office, presidents, members of Congress, especially presidents. Since World War II, our presidents have been terrible at clearly defining victory, what victory would mean, what the goal is. And this is all part of strategy. Strategy, the whole concept of strategy simply means identifying a goal and then figuring out what means will most likely achieve the goal, the end.
Sure.
What means to ends, right? You got to know what the end is so that you know what means to select that will hopefully result in the end or the goal. And so the very starting place is you got to define the goal, the end. What is it? If you're at war, the goal you want is victory. Okay. Well, it helps to define what would victory look like. What would it mean? And I want to give our members and our subscribers just a couple examples of statesmen, American statesmen, who had really crystal clear definitions of victory, and it helped them achieve their goals. George Washington in the Revolutionary War, he understood with perfect clarity that the goal was to get the British Army and Navy to board their own ships and sail away.
Right.
Once that happens, we've won. We can do anything we want.
Sure.
The influence, the control of England over us is gone. We can write constitutions, create a republic. We can do whatever we want to do. That's the goal. Get them to get back on their ship and sail away. Whatever it takes to make that happen. Or destroy them, kill all of them. But if we don't have to kill them all, just get them to go back home. The other example is Lincoln in the Civil War. And this is a subject near and dear to my heart, and this was an ongoing fight Lincoln had with his professional. The Civil War was the first big American conflict that really involves a class of professionally educated. They're not quite yet progressives because progressivism hadn't bloomed yet, but it's the forerunner to it.
Sure.
They went and studied the science of war in military academies. So he had these highly educated generals and officers. And then there's Lincoln. And the generals and officers wanted to keep fighting, wanted to pursue the enemy, wanted to go march through the capital of the Confederacy. And Lincoln the whole time is saying, none of that ends the war. You have to go crush the enemy army.
Right.
Crush it until they give up, right? Until they say, we're done, we're over, we're abandoning our army, here's all of our arms. Once that happens, that's victory and the war is over. Since World War II, American presidents have not been good at this. I was part of a crew in Claremont. I used to be the vice president of the Claremont Institute, and I was there on 9/11. And I was colleagues with Angelo Codavilla, who started writing on 9/11, and he's been writing ever since, including through all kinds of terrible health problems he's had. I encourage people to go follow Angelo. I think his work is the best out there. And the argument that Angelo was making and I've been making all along is you got to define what victory is on the war on terror. George Bush was one who came up with that term, the war on terror. And in the early days, right after 9/11, he would talk about bringing those individuals to justice. He used that phrase over and over. Now, of course, the individuals who actually engaged in murder using airplanes, they were gone. They were evaporated. There was no bringing them to justice. So it wasn't even clear who exactly would be brought to justice. And then what happened, the war on terror transmorphed into an effort to bring democracy to parts of the Middle East that haven't known democracy, places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and let's try to turn them into kind of replicas of the United States. And that's a plan to nowhere. How is this going to work when those people, they don't want to be a constitutional republic. Right. They don't know anything about it. They don't have a George Washington or a Thomas Jefferson or a James Madison or an Alexander Hamilton or a Ben Franklin. Right. They don't have any of these kinds of figures and influences and minds. And so we've been sputtering about without any clear goal, any clear definition of victory. And therefore, there's no strategic way to select the means to achieve the goal. And then when you look in terms of blame, I do want to say this about the terrible things happening in Afghanistan. This is not a partisan. This truly is not a partisan thing. If you're listening and you're thinking, oh, it's all those darn Democrats or it's all those darn Republicans, either way, you're missing something really big. I mean, this goes all the way back. You can go all the way back to Bill Clinton, who was president long before 9/11. And the Clinton administration knew about this growing effort, this organization of al-Qaeda. They had intelligence reports. They even knew something. They knew something that members of al-Qaeda were coming to the United States, and they did nothing.
Right.
Bill Clinton had bigger priorities. He trying to figure out where Monica was, things like that. They didn't do anything about it.
He was trying to define what is.
That's right. And then George W. Bush gets elected, and people tend to forget this. I mean, his whole emphasis the first few months of his administration was all on domestic policy. In fact, I loathe this. When George W. Bush got elected, his first big action item, he wanted to declare a state of emergency regarding marriage in the United States, and he wanted to create a federal bureaucracy that would go out and help couples with marriages. Can you imagine a government bureaucrat knocking on your door and say, I'm here from the government. I'm here to strengthen your marriage, right? That's where his mind was before 9/11.
Yes.
And then, right, instantly, for the entire remainder of his 2 administrations, he becomes a foreign policy president out of necessity. He doesn't have a choice. But as I've been talking about, right, he never defines the goal. Barack Obama comes in, and Obama has this very confusing policy. Under Obama, there's a huge surge. The United States sends over 100,000 troops to Afghanistan. More Americans, when you look at Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, and now Biden, far more Americans died during the Obama years than any of the other presidents. But again, there was no definition of victory. There was this naive belief that groups like the Taliban we could work with them, that they could be allies, when they're really just in bed with Al-Qaeda. It's hard to even distinguish the two. And Trump comes in, and I'm going to put the same blame on Trump as there's no clear definition of real victory. What does victory actually look like? And then explaining to citizens how we're going to achieve that. He talks about drawing down the troops, starts to draw them down. Biden gets elected and comes in, and now Biden is doing, in a way, the most feckless and pusillanimous thing imaginable. He's saying, I don't have a choice. I'm just the president. I'm bound by what my predecessor did. No, you're the president. If you think your predecessor's policy was a mistake, then change it. Change the policy. Do and explain why you're changing. Instead, he's just saying, I don't have a choice in the matter. I'm merely the president of the United States and commander in chief.
I think from your book, Save the Swamp, we can learn some things about why this has happened. In the bureaucracy, there is a clear separation between victory and goals, right? You're talking about what is the goal and what is the victory. And you've been using those terms for the last few minutes interchangeably.
Right.
But in a bureaucracy, those two terms don't mean the same thing.
Yeah.
In a bureaucracy, you have victory on the war on poverty, victory on the war on drugs, and you've got the goals of the bureaucrats. You've got the goals of, I want to get paid more. I want to hire more people. I want more power.
I want a bigger
budget.
budget.
More control. I want to be secure in my job. I want my 401k to grow. I want my government benefit. All of those things.
Yep.
It's the same thing in these wars. The idea of victory and the idea of goals, I don't think align at all. I think we saw for George Bush and for a lot of people, he was not very popular right at the very beginning of his presidency. And he looked at it and I think he thought 9/11 as an opportunity to improve his popularity. And it did. When he went and he said, we're going to go bring these people to justice, his popularity went straight up. That was his goal. There was no talk about victory.
Right.
Victory wasn't the purpose. The goal was his own political popularity. For Obama, there was no sense of victory in the Middle East. There was sense of I have my political goals. I have my personal goals. And then he had people around him that have been dubbed, I don't know how far back this term goes, but the military-industrial complex.
It goes back to Eisenhower.
But that doesn't just include the bureaucrats. It includes the government contractors who are building the weapons. And they have incentives, and they're incentivizing their congressmen, and they're incentivizing the president. Hey, let's keep doing this. Just the way we talk about big pharma has kind of been incentivizing the war on drugs to continue or the war on poverty to continue because it keeps lining their pockets. We've had the same thing there. The hardest part, and this goes back to your conversation about Washington and Lincoln, the hardest part is here we could determine victory because it was our victory. We could define what does victory look like because it was our victory. In Afghanistan, in Iraq, in the Middle East, and in all of these foreign wars, even going back to Vietnam, is what we want what their victory is? Is that victory for them? Do they even care?
Right.
Do they even want us to be victorious? And that's why I brought up this question, these polls. Do these people in Afghanistan, do they want Western civilization? Do they want freedom and property rights and all of the things that we talk about as important to the American idea? Or do they want Sharia law? Do people in the Gaza Strip want that? Do people in Jordan want that? And you have this battle, and if you want victory, if you believe that victory includes getting them to start becoming a democratic country or a constitutional republic, a country that actually respects people's rights.
Yeah, how about just a morally civilized country, right?
If you want that to happen,
Yeah.
it's not going to happen just by dropping bombs.
I agree.
It's not going to happen just by and this is the one thing that I actually really respected Trump for. And a lot of people didn't like that Trump went into North Korea.
Right.
But all the presidents before him who just said, you know what? Kim is crazy. We're not going to talk to Kim. We're not going to do any of these things. Trump went in there and said to him, do you know how good your life could be if you lived according to Western values? If you lived according to the American idea?
Right.
Do you know how much better your life would be? You wouldn't have to be worried about all of these things. And
Your country wouldn't be dark at night.
Right. I mean, and he at least understood that there was a part of that.
Yeah.
Nobody else is doing that. And you can't have victory. Forget what their goals are. Their goals are let's just keep getting paid. Let's just keep
Right.
things going.
Right.
But you can't have victory.
Well, there's a lot to say here, but I can't miss this opportunity for a shout out. So far, we are growing. The Vino Veritas Society is growing. We don't have any chapters in Afghanistan yet. We'll acknowledge that, right? Publicly, we don't have any. But if people in Afghanistan, well, if they have access to the internet, if they want to start learning the basic ideas of human freedom and flourishing, they certainly can become digital subscribers.
Absolutely.
Right? And they can start going through the American Idea Toolbox, and they can start learning these basic core concepts. I'm confident there are some people listening saying, oh, Dave's way off base. There are not Americans in the Defense Department who actually want to see Americans die, who want to just keep these wars going. Well, I'll say this. There are bureaucrats, lifelong bureaucrats, who have incentives. They have incentives. Yep. And their incentives are keep these things going. And then you couple that with all the huge contractors who supply the Defense Department with all the material goods, all the weaponry, everything that they need to run that. The United States Army is a huge organization. It needs lots of stuff. So does the Navy. So does the Air Force. Those contractors, they have an incentive there for these things to continue going. And so it's worth thinking about what those incentives mean. I'll add this, I mentioned Washington and Lincoln, and I'll add a point that kind of highlights the difference. Lincoln operated, one of the things, the Civil War was funded by the first national income tax. Mm-hmm. And we can raise all kinds of criticisms about income taxes, but it was by statutory law. And everyone understood, including Lincoln, this is the way he described it, it was temporary to fund the war. And the moment the war is over, income tax goes away. Mm-hmm. It's gone. Congress took on a lot of debt trying to fund the war, fund the Union Army. As soon as the war is over, they start paying down the debt. Within 20 years, they had cut that debt in half of the Civil War. Perhaps most tellingly, much of what Lincoln did, he did by way of executive order. Because he understood executive orders are temporary.
Right.
They can be undone, repealed, right, changed by a next president. He did them by executive orders, and he went to the public and explained why, including big, important things like the Emancipation Proclamation.
Sure.
That was an executive order. And he went out to the American people and explained in detail why he thought he had that power as commander-in-chief during the Civil War. And he said, if you disagree, if you think I'm making if I am violating the Constitution, either elect someone else at the next election, or if it can't wait, impeach me now.
Right.
But I'm doing this thing because I think this is necessary for the Constitution. Here's my reasons. I'm explaining it, justifying it, and ultimately you're the judge. You, the American people, are the judge of me, whether you think I'm right or not. Now, compare that with what Bush pushes for as he launches the war on terror, is an authorization of the use of military force that is basically indefinite.
Yep.
It's a statutory law. Says that the president wants to send forces. There's always going to be money and resources there for him to do it. It's institutionalizing and making it more permanent Whereas during the Revolutionary War, during the Civil War, all those extreme measures, even the ones that can be very objectionable. A lot of people have a lot of criticism. Some of the things Washington did, some of the things Lincoln did. We don't have to go into the details. This much was clear. They were all presented as temporary measures, and they were temporary measures. Today, we tend to institutionalize, right? The war on poverty, that's not a temporary thing. There are entire sprawling bureaucracies now where bureaucrats have lifelong tenure at those jobs to continue the war on poverty, and the war on terror is something very similar.
Yep. It's the growing bureaucracy that has been growing and growing and growing. I think the goal of what I hope everybody took away from this is it's not just in domestic policy. It spreads into every aspect of every place Americans are, everything that our country is getting involved in. That's not the American idea.
Maybe I'm trying to think of a good way to sort of turn a phrase. Wars fought by progressive governments tend to be permanent wars. Progressive wars tend to be permanent wars. Wars being supported by a big progressive bureaucratic apparatus, right? Because some people are thinking, well, George W. Bush wasn't a progressive. In some ways, he was quite progressive. Regardless, there's no doubt he launches this war effort, the war on terror, with a big progressive bureaucratic apparatus. Yep. And that big apparatus, those bureaucrats, their incentive is to make the thing as big and expensive and as drawn out as possible.
Which in turn enabled Obama to do a number of things that he did that many Republicans vehemently disagreed with.
Yeah.
So with that, we will continue to talk about the American idea. We're now just under a month or just over a month away from Leather Apron Club training for those who really want to get into these conversations.
Thank you for reminding us, Dave. That's important.
I think
September 23rd, 24th, 25th, we're going to be in Colorado, Black Hawk, Colorado. It's going to be I'm going to go out here and I'm going to say something might sound a little outlandish, and it's true. It's going to be a life-changing weekend. It's going to be a life-changing experience. If that's of interest to you, if you're interested in taking a deep dive into these ideas of the American idea, the American idea of liberty, and learning more about the Vino Veritas Society, getting to know us, getting to know other fellow citizens who are interested, becoming part of the inner circle of this organization, and then helping us create chapters in your hometown, home city, you should come to Leather Apron Club.
It's also a great chance if you have friends who you think they vote Republican maybe, but you think they're a little too progressive. You think they support some of the wrong things and you wish they understood ideas better. Encourage them to come join us. This will be a great chance for them to really get to spend some time, ask questions, right? People don't always get to spend that one-on-one time with us asking questions and really understanding things. And this is going to be the best opportunity for that.
Dave, if someone's listening right now and is nodding their head in agreement, thinking that actually sounds like I want to do that. I want to invest my time and I want to go get to know these guys and learn these ideas better. What do they do? What's the action item?
One of two things. Either send me an email, david@vinoandveritassociety.com, david@vinoandveritassociety.com, or go to our website, go to the commentary section. It's either at the bottom of the homepage or there's a link at the top. You can get there either way. And the very first article in the commentary section talks about Leather Apron Club. There's a link to our brochure for it in there, and you can learn all about it.
And there's contact information in there.
And there's contact information in there as well.
Phone number, email address.
Correct.
Okay, excellent. Until then, we're going to keep guarding the American idea best that we can.
Nos somos custodes.